Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. India's caseload continues to rise. Peak or not, the picture is not looking good. And the prospect of a third wave is even worse, especially because experts say it will hit the children. These are just projections, we know, but by now we've learned the lessons of not taking projections seriously. It's best to err on the side of caution. So India must find a way to vaccinate children. There are 450 million of them. We need 900 million doses. What are we doing? Right now, India is struggling to vaccinate those above 18. So the children will have to wait. India's efforts to get a patent waiver got a boost at the WTO, but there are many roadblocks ahead. Germany, for one, has refused to back India. A consensus may be elusive or very far away. In the meantime, what are India's options? Can India circumvent the roadblocks at the WTO to ramp up production? On Gravitas tonight, we'll discuss. Also on the show, a story that China would like to erase, the chilling testimony of a Uyghur woman, as she describes state-sponsored rape in Xinjiang. In the Maldives, the terrorist attack on former President and current Speaker of Parliament Mohammad Nasheed puts the focus back on growing extremism. A day after he pulled up Pakistani diplomats on live television, Prime Minister Imran Khans heads to Saudi Arabia in a bid to mend ties with the kingdom. And the world's super rich are flocking to Dubai to escape the pandemic. The result is soaring prices of luxury homes. We'll get you a report. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Japan extends a state of emergency currently in place by 20 days until 31st May. Fresh curbs put in place across the capital, Tokyo, Osaka, and neighboring Hyogo and Kyoto. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga says safe Tokyo Games are possible with restrictions, as doubts remain if the Olympics can go ahead as planned in July. In one of the deadliest police raids in Brazil, at least 25 people killed in a shootout between suspected drug traffickers and the police in Rio de Janeiro. The UN Human Rights Office calls for an independent investigation into the raid. Scuffles break out between Israeli forces and Palestinians in East Jerusalem over the possible eviction of Palestinian families. Israel's Supreme Court is due to hear challenges to the evictions of Palestinians ordered previously by a lower court. In a major blow to the aviation and tourism industries, Australia's trade minister says the country's international borders may not completely open until the second half of 2022. Australia's borders have been closed since early 2020 to stem the surge in COVID-19 cases. Qatar's Finance Minister Ali Sharif Al-Emadi has been arrested over alleged abuse of power and misuse of public funds, according to state media. The country's ruler, Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, issues a decree relieving Emadi of his duties. In another case of a shocking school shooting in Idaho, a 6th grade girl opened fire, hitting 2 students and a member of school staff. The girl was disarmed by a teacher at the middle school and held until law enforcement arrived. In an apparent easing of the standoff between the UK and France, French fishing boats withdraw from the British island of Jersey after a protest over post-Brexit fighting rights. Angry fishermen had earlier protested over new fishing license agreements on the Channel island of Jersey. And Russia holds a rehearsal of its upcoming Victory Day parade as Russians flocked to the Moscow city center to see a procession of historic and contemporary military vehicles, while Russian jets flew in formations in the skies. Russia commemorates the end of World War II on May 9th. Manchester United are through to the final of the UEFA Europa League despite a 3-2 second-leg defeat to AS Roma. The Red Devils carried a 6-2 advantage from the first leg, and Edinson Cavani's twin goals in Italy ensured they were never in any danger of letting Roma back into the tie. But there will be no all-English title clash as Arsenal were beaten in the semi-finals by Viva Real. Coached by former Gunners boss Unai Emery, the Spaniards held Arsenal to a goalless draw in the second leg in London to win 2-1 on aggregate. The Indian Cricket Board has announced a large 20-man squad for the next month's World Test Championship final against New Zealand and the Tour of England to follow. All-rounder Ravindra Jadeja, pacer Mohd Shami and batsman Hanuma Vihari are all back in the side after missing the home series against England earlier this year due to injury. But Hardik Pandya has been left out. KL Rahul and Ridhiman Saha have been included subject to fitness clearance. Rahul recently underwent appendicitis surgery while Saha is still recovering from COVID-19.
The second wave continues to hammer India. In the last 24 hours, India has reported more than 400,000 cases for a third time. More than 414,000 people tested positive in one day. The highest single-day figure ever for India. That takes total cases since last year to 21 million. India has more than 3.6 million active cases, the second highest in the world. The highest is still in the US. They have more than 6 million people who are positive right now, the active cases. And nearly 4,000 deaths in the last 24 hours in India. Is this the peak? It's hard to say. What's more worrying, though, are the projections of a third wave. By most estimates, children could be at risk in the next wave. For more than 2 weeks now, we've been talking about vaccination for children. Now, the Supreme Court of India has raised this. On Thursday, the top court asked the central government to ensure vaccination of children and start preparations to handle the third wave. Do you know how many kids have been infected in India since the pandemic began? Less than 4%. Around 700,000 children up to the age of 10 have been infected by the Wuhan virus. So far, experts have maintained that children are not among the vulnerable population. They're either asymptomatic or they recover after showing mild symptoms. But now the assessment is changing. Look at the United States. It's in the middle of the third wave. The caseload has fallen, yes, but more and more children are getting infected. Let me give you the example of Colorado. Children make up 26% of the new cases there, 26%. More than 800 children between 0 to 19 years have been hospitalized. In the past week, children accounted for 22% of the new cases in the US. 1 year back, they made up only 3% of the new cases. Do you see the surge? From 3% of all cases to 22%. Children are getting infected in larger numbers. The question is why? Experts have given 3 reasons for this. One is vaccination. As more adults get vaccinated, they're better protected. Children are not. Reason number 2, the new variants, they spread faster. They infect larger populations quickly, and that includes children. And reason number 3, the lifting of restrictions on school activities. Elementary and middle schools are reopening in many parts of the world, so children are being more exposed. So what do we do to save the children? Vaccinate them. There's a sudden urgency to do this, and rightly so, across the world. Canada has approved the Pfizer shot for 12 to 15-year-olds. America could soon be the next country to do that. Reports say this age group will be given the same doses as adults. More countries should start planning on these lines, not only to save the children, which itself should be motivation enough, but also to save others, because unvaccinated children could be what they call silent spreaders of the Wuhan virus. A study was published last year in the Journal of Pediatrics. Here is what it found. Children can have a quote-unquote significantly higher level of virus in their airways. What does that mean? It means that kids might not get very sick by an infection, but they can still carry a high viral load. What's a viral load? In simple words, it is how much virus you have in your body. So children could be more contagious than adults. Another study found that children spread the virus more efficiently. Those are the words they used, more efficiently than adults, because they can carry more virus. The study looked into kids younger than 5 years of age, those who were infected and showed mild to moderate symptoms. Researchers found that these kids had 10 to 100 times more virus in their nose and throat than older children and adults. So we need to protect our kids for two reasons. One, because the risk of infection is now high. And two, because they pose a risk to those around them. The writing is on the wall. It's important to vaccinate children sooner rather than later. Can they get the same shots as us? Yes, they can. Only the dosage will have to be different. As we speak, vaccine makers around the world are testing these shots on children. Companies like Pfizer and Moderna are conducting dosing trials. They're trying to figure out how much vaccine kids can tolerate. And children are not one age bracket, we must know that. Dosage will be different for a 6-month-old, a 6-year-old, and a 16-year-old. And it's important to get this right. We'll be tracking this story very closely. 450 million citizens of India are below the age of 18. 450 million. We cannot have herd immunity without vaccinating them. And to vaccinate them, we are going to need 900 million more doses. Right now, India has not even begun addressing this challenge. We're still struggling to find enough doses for those above 18. India has more than 1.3 billion people and a long road ahead. The good news is things are finally moving. America's support on patent waiver is a big win. But now Germany has thrown a spanner in the works. Chancellor Angela Merkel has opposed the waiver. She issued a statement which said, and I'm quoting, "The protection of intellectual property is a source of innovation, and it must remain so in the future." Listen to her spokesperson.
The US proposal to remove patent protection for COVID-19 vaccines has significant implications for the vaccine production overall. However, the limiting factor in vaccine production is production capacity and high quality standards, not patents.
So even during a global health crisis, Germany wants to keep patents locked. Europe is divided on the matter. Merkel wants patents. Macron backs a waiver. The European Union is sitting on the fence. It wants to, quote-unquote, discuss. In the best case scenario, it means a delay. In the worst case, it is a derailment. Remember, the World Trade Organization works on the basis of consensus. It has 164 members, and all of them, 164, must agree to a waiver. The European Union continues to block it. A consensus would be very hard to achieve. What if it isn't? What if the WTO does not eventually agree to a patent waiver? Do we have other options? Yes, we do. India could consider 3 other possibilities to unlock patents. Number 1, compulsory licensing. This is something that we've discussed before. Section 92 of India's Patents Act allows it. What is compulsory licensing? When the government forces vaccine makers to share their recipes, the vaccine formula. It can be done if the patent of a vaccine is registered in India, like Covaxin by Bharat Biotech. We discussed this today with Amitabh Kant, the CEO of Niti Aayog and the man leading an empowered group on the government's pandemic response. And he told us that India is considering sharing the patent for Covaxin with more manufacturers. Right, and this week India registered a big win at the World Trade Organization on vaccine patent waiver, but we have a long road ahead before things actually, take some sort of shape. In the meantime, what India can do is consider compulsory licensing to ramp up manufacturing of medical supplies and vaccines. Is that something that the government is actively considering?
So what the government has already done, as you are aware, is that Covaxin, which is produced by Bharat Biotech, it is not only being ramped up in Hyderabad, but a new facility in Bangalore. Plus, there are 3 other institutions which are going to manufacture Covaxin. And we should also try and see whether this can be spread out to many other vaccine manufacturing facilities in India. We should, the challenge there is only that we produce polio, rotavirus, which is also important. But ramping this vaccine, Covaxin, and many other areas on a licensing basis is very important. It's not just compulsory licensing. It can be licensed out, and Covaxin has actually been licensed out to 3 other players, but can be licensed out to many more players for manufacturing, as is being done with Sputnik now in India by 3 or 4 other manufacturers other than Reddy.
So that's one good step. And it won't be the first such. India has done this before, issued compulsory licenses. In the year 2011, such a license was granted for a compound held by a pharma company called Bayer, in fact. This compound helped treat kidney and liver cancer. Now, Bayer explored every legal option to overturn this waiver. It went to the Bombay High Court, even the Supreme Court of India, but ultimately it lost the case. Now, during this pandemic, Israel issued a compulsory license for a drug to treat the Wuhan virus. What I'm trying to say is that there is precedent, both domestic and international, for something like this. The second option is to buy intellectual property rights from companies. Here's how it works. The government talks to companies like Pfizer, AstraZeneca, or any other vaccine maker. You buy their patents, and then you allow Indian companies to use them. And this too has been tried before. Last year, Greece pushed a proposal before other European states. It wanted the European Union to buy the patent rights for both vaccines and Wuhan virus tests, and for this technology to then be shared among all European countries. But you know how the EU works. The idea did not take off there. But that's no reason why it should not be considered in India. And there are some possibilities worth exploring. Moderna has said it will not enforce patent rights for its vaccine. It's a shot with an efficacy of more than 94%, so it's a worthy candidate to consider. Say India manages to get these patents, what happens then? We'll have another hurdle to overcome. Indian manufacturers would then need the expertise to set up factories for these vaccines. And Moderna says it is willing to license its intellectual property. So India can explore it, discuss the possibilities. And finally, option number 3. And this is a combination of moves. India could first grant a compulsory license for a vaccine patent, then move for a waiver at the World Trade Organization to supply to other needy countries. So instead of waiting for the WTO to negotiate a waiver for everyone, this is what India can do. Make the first move, ramp up capacity, share the excess supply with, of course, support from the WTO. Now, the problem with compulsory license is this. It can be used for domestic production and use, meaning the waiver can only be used to make and use the home. You cannot export what you make through a compulsory license. The WTO has allowed an exemption. It happened in 2007. Canada had issued a compulsory license for an HIV drug for Rwanda. After a waiver from the World Trade Organization, Rwanda was able to import 7 million doses of the same drug from Canada. So India could use the same process to issue compulsory licenses for vaccines and drugs at home, set the prices, and then export the surplus to other countries. It helps the whole world. And using the same mechanism, India could also ask allies like America to waive vaccine patents, to get more companies to produce Wuhan virus vaccines and import the doses it needs. Experts believe it could take months to negotiate a patent waiver for everyone at the WTO. And with Germany now pushing back against waivers, India should start thinking about a plan B. The world has options. It has to muster the intent now. And we have Three important developments to share with you tonight. The first one is from the Netherlands, where scientists have trained bees to identify samples infected with the virus. This is a finding that could bring down the waiting time for a test result from hours and days to mere seconds. Bees will test you. The second big development is the discovery of a biomarker, something that can reliably predict whether infected patients will develop severe symptoms. And we'll tell you how that works in a bit. The third big development, and this is the worrying one, is from Delhi. Doctors are witnessing a rise in cases of what is called black fungus in patients once again. The symptoms include face numbness, nose obstruction, swelling in the eyes, and doctors say this infection can be fatal. Call them what you will, breakthroughs, trends, patterns, but going forward, we must note all of these. All three of these will be tracked to shape our pandemic strategy. Here's a report.
These are no ordinary bees, and this is no ordinary experiment. These insects have been trained to detect infected COVID-19 samples through their unusually keen sense of smell. This is a finding that could cut the waiting time for test results to seconds. But how exactly? Scientists at the Wageningen University in the Netherlands have been training these bees for months. They started off by giving bees a treat, a sugar water solution, each time they were exposed to the scent of a mink infected with COVID-19. And each time they were exposed to a non-infected sample, they wouldn't get a treat. Eventually, the bees could tell the difference. They could identify an infected sample within a few seconds. How? By extending their straw-like tongue to drink sugar water. This is a confirmation of a positive coronavirus result. A quick and cheap method that could prove useful in countries where tests are scarce.
We take the bees from a honeybee keeper here in the region. And we use a set of bees every day. And we put those bees in harnesses to fix them. And then we present coronavirus positive and coronavirus negative samples. And after presenting a positive sample, we always present sugar water afterwards. So in the end, the bees extend their proboscis after being presented a coronavirus positive sample. And in that way, we can train bees pretty quickly.
Nearly 800 kilometers away, researchers at the University of Zurich have made another significant discovery. They have identified the first biomarker that can reliably predict which patient will develop severe symptoms. What is this biomarker? A set number of natural killer T cells in the blood. These cells are primarily white blood cells that are part of the early immune response. Based on this biomarker, doctors will be able to decide which treatment and measures need to be taken for a certain patient. Back in India, the struggle gets tougher. Doctors report rising cases of mucormycosis in the national capital. What's that? Black fungus. In the last 2 days, 6 patients have been hospitalized with this serious but rare fungal infection. Black fungus is caused by a group of molds or mucormycetes. These molds live throughout the environment, but mainly affect people with existing health issues or people who take medicines that lower the body's ability to fight germs. The symptoms include face numbness, nose obstruction on one side, swelling in eyes, and pain. Experts say this disease can prove to be fatal. These are just 3 developments. As the virus changes form, it's important to map the trends and focus on both new challenges and breakthroughs. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
History is repeating itself in China. The state is murdering its own people and the world is looking the other way. For China, this is nothing new. Every Chinese leader has presided over extermination campaigns. Mao Zedong presided over 2, the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Tens of millions were killed, but it was justified as necessary upheaval. a collateral damage of the revolution. Decades later, Deng Xiaoping ordered tanks into Tiananmen Square. Several thousand protesters were killed in a single day. Deng would later say Tiananmen was painful, but it achieved common good. Now we come to present day, to the era of Xi Jinping. He is the chief architect of the biggest extermination campaign in the 21st century, the Uyghur genocide in Xinjiang. Like his predecessors, President Xi too has an excuse. He claims to be fighting Islamist radicalism. The world has gathered enough proof to the contrary. We have videos, interviews, raw data. All of them indicate one thing. China wants to end the Uyghur people. There are nearly 1 million of them in forced labor camps. But this is just the start. If the world keeps ignoring this threat, China will turn these labor camps into death camps, and this is not an exaggeration. How do we stop this? By keeping up the pressure. On this show, we have presented evidence against China. We have showed you the labor camps. We have played interviews of survivors, and tonight we bring you one more. Tursune Ziawudun. She was detained twice by the Chinese. Her second stint lasted nearly 10 months. On Thursday, she testified at the U.S. Capitol. We will show you two separate portions of her testimony tonight. The first one talks about the daily routine at these camps. Listen to what she says.
I was taken on March 8th, 2018, and kept there for more than 10 months. Buses would arrive every day with more detainees. It was very overcrowded. There was a bucket in the corner for a toilet. There were cameras watching us inside the cell, and we were always hungry. Each meal was a watery soup and a bun. We were given injections of unknown medications. Every day, we had to endlessly swear loyalty to the Chinese government and reject our faith.
That testimony is a long list of human rights violations: forced detention, overcrowded cells, surveillance cameras, scientific experimentation, and brainwashing. Unfortunately, things do not end here. In fact, they get a lot worse. Before we play this next portion, I must tell you this. The content is graphic. It describes rape, forced sterilization, emotional trauma. We want you to hear this story, but not at the cost of your own mental health. So we advise viewer discretion for this bit.
Girls would be taken away and only brought back days later. I saw girls lose their sanity because of it. And then I myself was taken, along with another woman. I was tortured with an electric stick pushed inside my genital tract. I could hear the other woman's screams in the next room. I knew the guards were raping her. After that, she never stopped crying. One time an order came. All the women had to be sterilized or fitted with an IUD. Many young women were crying, screaming when they were told they would be sterilized and could never have children. I left the camp in December 2018. Before my release, the officials warned me if I spoke about my experience, there would be heavy consequences. I still did not feel free. One day I saw a former cellmate. She had survived, but she was dead inside, completely finished by the rapes. The government's goal is to destroy everyone.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I'm not sure I want to. What Ziawudun described is the worst of humanity. Rape and sexual violence are the norm inside these camps. They are the tools of torture used by the state. All of it sanctioned and carried out by the Chinese government. Ziawudun's last words are quite striking. She says her cellmate was dead inside. And that's exactly what China is trying to do: systematically dehumanize Uyghurs, remove their culture and identity, and replace it with the Han culture. If this is not a crime against humanity, nothing is. And the world has been a spectacular failure on this issue. This week, the New Zealand Parliament was debating the Uyghur crackdown. They removed the word genocide from the final statement. What about the US? They have piled up a mountain of evidence against China, but when will the prosecution begin? Former President Trump privately supported this crackdown. His successor does not want conflict. He wants competition. And then we have the United Nations, which is a sitting duck for Chinese influence. The Secretary General is yet to appoint a special envoy for Uyghurs. There are envoys for climate change, for financing, for Yemen, even for the recent coup in Myanmar, but none for Uyghurs. Unlike trade or the South China Sea, there is no strategy here. There is only right and wrong. The West has already tried sanctions, both on Chinese officials and goods produced in the Xinjiang province. But a country preparing for genocide does not care about sanctions. This is a defining moment in history. The world has been here before. A ruthless regime exterminating an ethnic group in death camps. Back then, we reacted late. The cost was millions of lives. More than half a century later, we're making the same mistake again. Late last night, the world's focus shifted to the Maldives, a country that is barely spoken about in the news, but it was suddenly making top global headlines. The former president of the Maldives and the current speaker of its parliament, Mohammed Nasheed, was injured in a terror attack. Reports say the Islamic State claimed responsibility. Our next report tells you how the events unfolded and why the attack on Mohammed Nasheed is a very worrying trend for South Asia.
A ripped-up motorcycle, bloodstains, and a crowd flocking with their cell phones. A scene like this is quite unusual in the Maldives, but on the night of the 6th of May, these visuals were being beamed across the world from outside the family home of a former president. Mohammed Nasheed was rushed to the hospital moments before this video was captured. A bomb placed in this motorcycle had gone off when Nasheed was approaching his car. The country's first democratically elected president was attacked by terrorists. And for a good couple of hours, not many in the country knew how Nasheed was doing. Later in the night, doctors ruled out any worrying injuries. The former president was responsive before he was put on anesthesia, they said. The focus then shifted to the perpetrators of the attack. Local media reported that the Islamic State had claimed responsibility. This did not come as a surprise to many. Estimates say the Maldives contributed the most number of terrorists per capita in Syria. At least 173 people from the Maldives had joined the ISIS. 26% of them were women. And these are just the confirmed numbers. Even before the ISIS declared a caliphate, 12 terrorists from the Maldives had died in Pakistan. This was back in 2008. A year before that, the island country was shaken by its first major attack. An IED had gone off at a prominent park in Malé. 12 foreign terrorists were injured. In more recent years, bloggers and journalists have been murdered in the Maldives. Beachgoers have been assaulted over their attire. Former President Abdullah Yameen was attacked in 2015. With the pandemic, the situation became all the more volatile. In April 2020, 5 speedboats and 2 dinghies were set ablaze at the Mahibadu harbor. The Islamic State claimed responsibility here, too. Now that you have a broad idea of the Maldives' battle with terrorism and extremism, what do you think explains this attack on Nasheed? Mohammed Nasheed has been an outspoken critic of religious extremism. The former president spoke about the problem of Islamic radicalization and the ISIS in an interview to WION not too long ago.
You talked about Islamic State. How big it is a worry for your country? And what can India do in making sure that that ideology does not spread in South Asia and particularly in your country?
We are very confident that we have a good grip on the situation, and we feel that Maldives will be safe. We know the people. Our police is keeping a very close tag.
Nasheed is a friend of WION and a friend of India. Moments after the news of the attack reached New Delhi, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar tweeted that Nasheed will not be intimidated. Back in the Maldives, President Ibrahim Salih has confirmed an investigation into the attack, and a team of investigators from Australia is expected to arrive in the island soon. The attack on one of South Asia's most prominent leaders comes not too long after the Easter bombing in Sri Lanka. For the region, this trend is worrying to say the least. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
They say climate change is a global issue, something the entire world is responsible for. This is nothing but Western propaganda. For more than 2 centuries, they went on a pollution spree. Trains, factories, oil refineries, the West was a powerhouse of emissions. Most of the pollution we see today is from that era because climate change is not immediate. Today's pollution is building up for a disaster in the future. Not many people know this. We are told that every country is equally responsible. It's an excellent bit of propaganda, and we've been busting this. The big polluters must pay up. It starts with the United States and Europe. They polluted the world, and in the process, they made big money. But today, we have a new addition to the list, a country that is out-polluting the world, and that country is called China. This is what the greenhouse emissions from 2019 look like. China made up 27% of it. This is more than the United States, India, and the European Union and Japan put together. In fact, you can leave India out and add all the developed nations, and they would still fall short of China. So a couple of questions here. Where is China headed? Where does this leave the battle against climate change, and what role will the West play? Question number 1. Where is China headed? President Xi Jinping says China's emissions will peak by 2030. So to answer the question, China's emissions are heading up. In 2020, they surged 1.7%. Remember, this is during the pandemic when most of the world was locked down. Global emissions dropped, but China's emissions went up. What about per capita numbers? China usually scores well on that indicator. It helps when you have 1.4 billion people to share the massive load. But in 2019, that wasn't the case. The developed world reported 10.5 tons per capita. China came close with 10.1 tons. And to give you some context, they were at 7.18 tons in 2016. So the rise has been exponential for China. In the last 2 decades, Chinese per capita emission tripled. And if this trend holds, China will overtake the US before 2030. Where does this leave China's climate commitments? Peak emissions by 2030, net zero by 2050. That's what Xi Jinping has promised. But how realistic is this? Last year, Beijing cleared coal power projects worth $474 million. These are all investments outside China. What about inside the country? More than half the energy demand is still being met using coal in China. More than half. So Beijing is using the Western playbook. In fact, it is perfecting it, exporting pollution and at the same time burning coal at home. Question number 2. Where does this leave the battle against climate change? Chinese officials have ranked their priorities. Economic growth beats pollution. And on this, most of the developing world is in agreement. But China's pace is worrying. It makes up nearly 18% of the world population, 18% of the world population, but 27% of emission. A climate change conversation without China is pointless. And so far they have promised a lot, but with China we know promises do not matter. Which brings us to the third question we want to answer tonight. What can the West do? And to be honest, they have done enough damage. So it would be better for them to stay away. We are still paying for their centuries of pollution. Let me show you a graph. It shows cumulative emissions. Right from 1750 to 2019, the developed world is at 1,000 gigatons. What about China? Somewhere around 200. And that's how far ahead the West is. The developing world would take decades to catch up. But here's the thing, countries like India do not want to catch up. India is exploring green alternatives already, but China is steaming ahead with coal. There are 1,058 coal plants in the country in China. More than half the global capacity is in China. What about the Paris Accord goals? Climate trackers have called the progress highly insufficient. So that's where things stand at the moment. The West is still the big villain. They must foot the bill for reversing climate change, but China is fast catching up. And if they do not turn away from coal, you can add climate change to the list of things that China must pay for. Imran Khan is a furious man these days. Pakistani diplomats are giving him a difficult time. No, they haven't been stealing any wallets. the envoys in question have apparently failed to serve the Pakistani diaspora in their respective countries. Allow me to explain what has happened. Not too long ago, Islamabad launched a citizens portal for complaints, primarily for the Pakistani diaspora living in West Asia. Now, this portal has been buzzing with complaints of late. Pakistani expats in Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been voicing their grievances against various departments of the Pakistan Foreign Ministry and its embassies, and most of them complained about the indifferent attitude the embassies were showing. So the Prime Minister decided to give the diplomats a piece of his mind. He sat 20 of them for a dressing down, which was broadcast for the world to witness. He came prepared with what the Pakistan media is calling a damning list of transgressions. And he slammed the envoys on live television for working with a colonial mindset. We've identified the best bits for you. Take a look.
Because मैं आपको बता दूं, इस तरह हम नहीं चल सकते. ये जिस तरह हम अब चल रहे हैं ना, हमारी एम्बेसीज, ये कोई पुराना अंग्रेजों का कॉलोनियल सिस्टम तो चल सकता है, ये मौजूदा पाकिस्तान के अंदर इस तरह का सिस्टम नहीं चल सकता. एम्बेसीज का काम सबसे बड़ा अपने लोगों को जो जिधर बड़ी डायस्पोरा हो उसको सर्विस करना. ये जो मुझे एक्सपीरियंस, जो मुझे कंप्लेंट्स आने शुरू हुए सऊदी अरेबिया से, हमारी जो वहाँ लेबर क्लास है, जो हमारे मेहनत कश लोग हैं, उनसे कंप्लेंट्स आने शुरू हुए कि जी एम्बेसी बिल्कुल अनरिस्पॉन्सिव है, वो कर नहीं रही.
The Prime Minister did not stop there. He went on to corner his diplomats over foreign investments. He said the ambassadors had failed to attract foreign money. He also underlined that Indian embassies were more proactive in bringing investment. You have to watch this.
और मैं ये कहूँगा कि हिंदुस्तान के अंदर जो उनकी एम्बेसीज हैं, वो बहुत ज़्यादा प्रोएक्टिव हैं हिंदुस्तान के अंदर इन्वेस्टमेंट लाने के लिए, as opposed to Pakistani embassies.
He's right. Indian embassies have indeed set the barometer quite high, but that's not the point here. The point is that Imran Khan spoke a lot. Has he taken any action though? Yes, he has. The Pakistan government has suspended its outgoing ambassador to Saudi Arabia. It has also recalled 6 of its diplomats posted at the embassy, and all of them have returned to Islamabad. At the same time, Imran Khan himself has left for Riyadh. Does he plan to personally apologize to the Pakistani diaspora? Not that we know of. He is there to rebuild relations between the two countries, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. These two countries had reached their lowest point last year. In February 2020, when Saudi Arabia refused an OIC foreign ministers meeting on Kashmir, Imran Khan tried switching sides. He travelled to Malaysia. He attacked the OIC. And he attacked them for failing to speak in one voice. Saudi Arabia responded by making Pakistan repay its short-term loans. And then in August 2020, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi publicly lashed out at the Saudis over their quote-unquote inaction on Kashmir. Riyadh responded by turning off the oil tap and withdrawing $1 billion from a $3 billion loan it had extended in 2018 to Pakistan. So now Pakistan has come to realize that it cannot be punching above its weight. Saudi Arabia is the de facto leader of the Islamic world, the biggest source of foreign direct investment after China for Pakistan. 2.5 million Pakistani expats live there. Their remittances are running the country, or a large part of it. Imran Khan's visit is aimed at keeping things this way. Riyadh has made it absolutely clear that it will not take sides against India on Kashmir. And this visit indicates that Pakistan has accepted this fact because Imran Khan has not gone to Riyadh alone. With him is the Army Chief of Pakistan, General Qamar Javed Bajwa. We'll be tracking developments. The pandemic has kicked off an exodus of a different kind. The rich from around the world are fleeing their pandemic-hit countries. And many of them, interestingly, are landing in Dubai. Rates for luxury properties have skyrocketed in the city. Going by one claim, sales are up by as much as 230%. Here's a report.
Through this pandemic, the UAE has kept the virus under control and its borders open. New infections average below 2,000. You can take off your mask indoors, party like it's 2019, and spend your day on the beaches. That should explain why the rich are flocking to Dubai. As the rest of the world struggles with virus mutations and vaccine shortages, foreign buyers are picking up luxurious properties in Dubai, one of the few cities in the world where they can conduct business in person. Sales of high-end properties have soared. Dubai's largest real estate website says they shot up by 230% in the first quarter of 2021. 90 properties worth $2.7 million each were bought last month. This was on top of 84 new purchases in March. This was an 8-year high. What's working in Dubai's favor is its sales pitch as the world's most friendly vacation spot. There is no mandatory quarantine unless you are coming from the worst affected countries. Restrictions are minimal within the city. Cases are under control thanks to an aggressive vaccination campaign. The UAE has administered more than 10 million shots by now, covering more than half of its population. A highly liberalized vaccine rollout is the cherry on the cake for the rich. Dubai offers a shot to anyone with a residency visa. Last month, a report claimed that cash-rich Indians are traveling to Dubai for a jab of Pfizer's Wuhan virus vaccine, which is not available in India. But it's not only the rich who left for Dubai before the surge in India. Even the economy class was packed before the UAE suspended flights from India. One report says last-minute flights from Mumbai to Dubai cost as much as $1,000. That's around 10 times more than the usual rate. A ticket from Delhi was being sold for more than $600. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Did you know that during the last global recession, men lost more jobs than women? And the reason was simple. There were more men in the workforce compared to women, and men dominated the industries that were hit hardest by the recession, like construction and manufacturing. The 2009 recession was widely headlined as the man session. It's been over a decade. The composition of the global workforce has changed. More women have joined the payroll. But the pandemic is threatening to put an end to their careers and financial independence. You see, the Wuhan virus has upended a woman's work-life balance. She's juggling work and caregiving duties. Schools are closed, so children are home. Daycares are also closed, so toddlers too are home during work hours. They need care and attention. They need food on time. Who takes care of all of this? Women. It's an unsaid and socially arranged task, and it is universal. Whether you're Indian or American, whether you're Irish or watching us from Australia, it is the same everywhere. And you will agree that when it comes to caregiving, a gender role reversal is an exception. The job is unpaid, it comes with no economic security, and in times like these, it jeopardizes a woman's source of livelihood, her office job. Deloitte surveyed nearly 400 working women across countries. 82% of them said that their lives have been disrupted by the pandemic. 70% said they're concerned that their career growth may be limited by the pandemic. And this crisis has forced women to play multiple roles, juggling more than they were doing before. They're teachers to their young children who attend classes from home. They help them cope with online learning, battle COVID anxiety, the stress of not being able to go out and play or meet their friends. The pandemic has also shut out professional caregivers, so a woman is also taking care of the elderly parents at home, also the specially abled. And all of this has to be done while meeting work deadlines. It is not an easy job. So women around the world are burned out. In the US alone, more than 2.3 million women have left the workforce since February 2020. Women's participation in the labor force has dipped to rates not seen since 1988, meaning lower than the 2009 recession. And this is according to America's National Women's Law Center. It says in December 2020 alone, women accounted for 100% of the jobs lost. 1 in 4 women in America are considering leaving the workforce or downshifting their careers. According to a McKinsey study, women are 1.5 times more likely to downshift their roles or leave the workforce because of this pandemic. And this trend, too, is universal. According to a survey by the Royal Bank of Scotland, 71% of businesswomen in the UK have found the pandemic extremely stressful, as opposed to 55% of the male entrepreneurs. In India, female labour force participation rate fell to 20.3% in 2020. Women accounted for 13.9% of job losses in April 2020. That's within a month of India's lockdown. Experts say working moms left the workforce faster than the rest. In France, when the employment rate for women remained relatively stable through the pandemic, a survey found that working mothers were putting at least 4 additional hours per day into caregiving and domestic chores. They were also putting up with domestic violence. It increased 30% during the first lockdown in France. The statistics are grim, the crisis all the more. 2 years into this pandemic, it has only exacerbated. Women today are not okay. Many of them need support. The question is, who is helping them? What are governments doing? Australia is pumping money into childcare. At least $1.7 billion US. The idea is to help women return to work while state-funded care facilities take care of the children. What about other countries? France chose to keep schools and daycares open during its second lockdown to help mothers return to work. Was it the safest option? France believes so, given that the initial variants of the virus did not seem to affect school-going children so much. What about corporates? What are they doing to help women employees and working mothers? The pandemic has threatened to widen the gender pay gap. The world could lose women in leadership roles, and corporates will feel the pinch, and I will tell you why. Studies show that company profits and share performance are 50% higher when women are well presented in leadership, well represented. Women in the workplace help companies embrace more employee-friendly policies. Women in the workforce help in bridging gender and racial gaps. The pandemic is threatening to put an end to generations of struggle for diversity, for equality. Women are 11 times more unlikely to return to work when the pandemic ends. So what can we do? We can try to change this, create awareness, create a more empathetic workplace, share responsibility at home. As we count down to Mother's Day, help working mothers chase their dream, reach new heights. Don't let the pandemic clip their wings. I want to leave you with this, ending with Gravitas image as always. Thanks very much for watching. Have a good weekend.
Stay connected with the world through WION. Like the page on Facebook.